All right, welcome to the TC Dojo, where you choose the topics and we find the experts. This morning we are so excited to have Mark Baker back as our visiting Dojo Master. We all know Mark Baker. He is a 25-year veteran of the technical communication industry with particular experience in developing task-oriented, topic-based content, communicating for the web. He's worked as a technical writer, a manager, a structured authoring consultant, trainer, designer, architect. He's done it all. He's built structured authoring systems. That's why we're so excited to have him here. This presentation is the second of three. At the STC Summit last year, that 45 presentation he gave turned out to be 90 minutes, so we know there's going to be questions. This is the second one. We broke that presentation into 3 parts. If you want to see the first one, it's on YouTube. Don't forget to sign up for part 3 coming in April. Don't worry, we'll remind you how to do that at the end. Right now, I'm just as excited as you are to get started, so let's turn it over to our visiting Dojo Master, Mark. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Show your screen, and it's all yours.
All right, thank you very much, Liz. So this is part 2 of Information Architecture Bottom-Up. The emphasis here being on how to write for a bottom-up information architecture. A reminder about the book, and the material I'm going to cover today is covered in much greater detail in the book. So if you have questions specific, how do I do this kind of questions about the writing process, the book should be a big help to you. So in the last session, we looked at how we have gone as a society and as a civilization from a very top-down hierarchical approach to organizing and accessing information to one that is much more bottom-up. And that's nowhere better exemplified than in what has happened to encyclopedias over the last several centuries. So in the 18th century, the era in which the encyclopedia was invented, we had a very, very hierarchical approach in which the various encyclopedia writers attempted to come up with an overall hierarchy of all human knowledge. And several of them were tried. Some of them look quite funky today. But all of them proved unsatisfactory in one way or another. The knowing how to find something down through these hierarchies, it never proved to be intuitive. And so by the 20th century, encyclopedias were usually organized in an alphabetical order. You would have an index that would give you different ways of getting into the middle of it, but the fundamental organization of the content was alphabetical. It's given up to the idea that we could have a top-down organization of everything. That didn't mean that we weren't still using top-down organization. Most books were still, of course, organized top-down through a table of contents. And we looked at the various ways in which you can construct a table of contents, and we looked at where they work, where they don't work, where they fall down. And we saw that the biggest problem, really, with tables of contents is that no matter whether you do them as a curriculum or you do them as an organizational scheme, as a classification scheme, none of them scale to the kinds of size of information that people are using today. And that leads us to what a 21st century encyclopedia looks like, which is that it is not in any order. It makes no sense to ask what order is Wikipedia in. It isn't in alphabetical order. It isn't in any order. The way that information is related, articles are related to each other in Wikipedia, is through the links between articles. And so you can enter Wikipedia at any page and you will find lots of links to related subjects. All of the organization, therefore, is bottom-up. One of the consequences of this that we looked at is that we are used to thinking of our content as appearing in a neat, well-organized block. So if we think about our content on the web, then we think of the web as being this huge thing, and we have our little corner of it that's all nicely organized. And we think that that's how people see our content. They come to our site and say, oh, what a lovely site, and they navigate around our site. That's not how it actually works. This is how our content actually appears on the web. It actually appears as a number of independent pages on different subjects scattered all over the place, because when people actually visit the web, they get a collection of links that they visit from all kinds of different places. And so individual pages from our site appear in different searches on different subjects. Lots of people are realizing this and commenting on how the home page in particular is a concept of how you organize information, how you know, traditionally a website has had a home page, and this is where you expected people to start. We're now increasingly realizing that home pages are obsolete. So this is Anne Friedman, the Columbia Journalism Review. As more and more traffic comes from search and social, the home page as an entryway into a site's content is increasingly obsolete. Content strategist Gerry McGovern talks about control of the homepage often represents a Pyrrhic victory for traditional marketers and communicators. Only 10% of the site visitors are coming to a homepage, and most of those don't click on news links or other things that you're trying to guide them to. Thus, he says, controlling the homepage is only the illusion of controlling the message. The truth of the matter is people can come in through any page. There is actually an interesting study that examines this behavior. One of the great things about the web is we know more than we've ever known before about how people are actually using content, because every time you touch a web page or touch a link, you leave a record, and people can actually do plots of how people move through content. And some researchers at Xerox PARC did a study of these patterns, and then what they were doing is looking for other patterns that were similar. And what they found was that the most similar pattern was the pattern of wild animals foraging for food. So we forage for information on the web or on a captive information system like a help system in exactly the same way that these bears are foraging for food. And this has some really interesting consequences which Jacob Nielsen has explored. It's a really good blog post. It's worth looking up. It's more than 10 years old now, but it's still, I think, one of the most important things written about the web. Information foraging predicts that the easier it is to find good patches, the quicker users will leave a patch. Thus, the better search engines get at highlighting quality sites, the less time users will spend on any one site. This is really important. As the web gets better and better, sites matter less and less, and individual pages matter more and more, because people can assemble the pages that they want. David Weinberger, in a really fantastic book called Too Big to Know, makes a similar comment. He says, we seem to be making a cultural choice with our new infrastructures thumb heavily on the scale. In other words, the web is leading us in this direction, to prefer to start with abundance rather than curation. Include it all, filter it afterward. And even then, the filters do not remove anything. They filter forward, not out. So the web is really filters forward the best pages on a particular subject. And again, it's pages that come forward, not sites, not books, but pages that come forward. And this is what we see in Google search results. This is exactly the same page that I showed in the last session, where I talked about this being a dynamic semantic cluster. What has happened here is that we've done a search of everything, right? Include it all. So ask the entire web how to set up a printer in Linux, and it gives me a selection of the best pages, all of which come from independent sites. So this is pages that are coming. And and then you can go through this and pick out the one you want. So filter it afterwards. I have asked the entire web how to set up a printer in Linux, and then I'm filtering through afterwards. Include it all, filter it afterwards. And again, almost certainly not a single one of these is a home page. And not in any point in my process of setting up my printer in Linux am I going to hit the home page of any of these sites. Another really interesting thing that Weinberger says in Too Big to Know is that this involves a huge shift in authority. If our social networks are our new filters, and a lot of the filtering that we do on the web is through social networks, then authority is shifting from experts in faraway offices. Experts in faraway offices would be us, to a network of people we know, like, and respect. So it's becoming far more common for people to seek out people who they know, who they like, who they respect, who have something in common with, rather than it is to come to the expert. So another way of saying all this is that there's been an inversion of how people look for information. The old model was, first you find an authority. You go out and you look for who is the authority, who can I ask this question to? And then you ask your question. That's how we did it in the 20th century. That's how we were trained to do it. To use the library, to get the books, talk to the reference librarian. Who's the right person to ask? Then ask the question. In the 21st century information seeking is first you ask your question of the entire universe. And then, if necessary, you go through and try to establish the authority of the answer. Of course, many of the answers we get on the web are not necessarily authoritative, not necessarily trustworthy. And so we then have to go through and try and figure out which ones we trust. And I know that a lot of tech writers will sort of dismiss the web and say, well, you shouldn't use the web because you get all these bad answers. But the fact of the matter is people do, because they have switched their habit. And it's not that they don't care about authority. It's that they're asking their question first and then trying to figure out the authority of the answer, rather than trying to find an authority first to ask a question. And again, this is really another way of saying include it all, filter it afterwards. The filtering is about trying to figure out the authority. And one of the things this means is readers are on an individual journey through webs of information. When they hit our content, it is because somewhere in their journey they hit that page. Which means that our content is probably only one resource that they're going to visit on that journey through the web, through that dynamic semantic cluster that they've assembled for themselves. What that means is that most of our readers are not going to come into our table of contents. They're not going to come into our thank you for buying Acme widgets page. They're not going to come into our introductory page. They're going to come into a page that Google thinks, or that somebody on a social network thinks, is a useful resource for the question that they asked. And they're going to have that page as one of a selection of things in a search window. And even if they're searching within your content, they're going to go, most people now, where they're using a help system, go straight to search, and they get a list, and they pick stuff out of that list. So again, you are going straight into one page. And that is the first page. For that user, whatever page it is that comes up as a result of a Google search, as a result of a help system search, as a result of following a link provided by a social network, that is their page one. And that means every page is page one. Every page in your entire information set is page one. Now, the rest of this presentation, I'm going to talk about how you write a page so that every page works as page one. So if there are questions right now about the general reasoning behind this, I'd be happy to entertain them. If not, then we'll move on.
It looks good. I think everyone's thinking just like I am.
All right. So How do you write an every page is page one topic? What I've attempted to do is to boil it down to 7 principles. There's a lot of overlap between these principles. In many ways, they're different ways of looking at the same thing, and we'll see that as we go through them. This is the first one. An every page is page one topic should be self-contained, and that means it has to have a high level of cohesion. In other words, all the pieces that you need to make this page work should be there, and they should hang together really well. There should be no linear dependencies between this topic and another topic. The topic should never assume that you've read X. Never tell you that you're going to read Y next, because there's absolutely no way to constrain people to doing that, and they probably won't. So if you write the content as if they have to have read something else before this, or as if they are going to read something else after it, it's probably not going to work the way they want it to work. So you need to make sure this content has no linear dependencies. You don't have to have read something before. You're not necessarily going to read something else after it. They may very well assume that you know things. I mean, every piece of content actually assumes that you know things because it uses language and references, and if you don't know them, you won't understand it. So all content assumes you know stuff. But we're talking here about writing content that doesn't assume that you've read any particular thing. Now, if you've heard much about topic-based writing at all, you've probably come across the concept of concept, task, and reference. It's particularly prominent in DITA. You'll find a similar concept in information mapping, and where they have 6 types, what they call information blocks. The word blocks comes from information mapping. And there is a tendency to think, this is not necessarily implicit in DITA, and it certainly isn't implicit in information mapping, but there is a tendency to think that this means that each topic should be exactly of one type and one type alone. So that every procedure must always be presented entirely by itself. Well, that is not going to meet the test of being self-contained. Procedure is not going to work by itself without any explanation or any context in many situations. People, don't know which procedure to execute or how to execute it without some planning being involved. And so you're not going to get a freedom from linear dependencies and a high level of cohesion if your entire topic is just a procedure. So many different information blocks may be required to make up an every page is page one topic. Sometimes they'll be very simple, sometimes they may be quite long and complex. What you'll notice is that length is not one of the principles. This is not about length. A better guide to the size, if you like, of a topic is that it is self-contained, as we said, and that it focuses on solving one particular issue. So a recipe is highly self-contained. It tells you everything you need to know to cook exactly one dish. And it has a specific and limited purpose, that is, to cook that one dish. The purpose is not only, I want to emphasize here, not only specific, but limited. You need to limit the purpose of your topics if this is going to be effective. And the reason for that is that it's very, very easy once you said, okay, well, this is to help somebody cook this one dish. And then you realize, well, not everybody knows how to whisk eggs, or not everybody knows how to sweat vegetables. So maybe I better put that in. That'll make it easier for people. It'll make it more self-contained, you might think, to put that in as well. And the trouble is, if you do that, you're going to have a recipe that's 40 pages long and that nobody can actually use to cook anything because it's so hard to find the instructions you actually need in all of the how to do other stuff. So an individual topic has a specific and limited purpose. It does one thing and it does it well. This is how you deal with the problem of people who are reading a recipe don't know how to sweat vegetables. There's a wonderful site out there for any aspiring cook called The Reluctant Gourmet. And it's full of articles on how to do basic cooking techniques like how to sweat vegetables. So our recipe has a specific and limited purpose. Help an experienced cook cook a dish, one particular dish. This topic from The Reluctant Gourmet doesn't teach you how to cook a dish. That's not its specific and limited purpose. Its specific and limited purpose is to teach you an individual cooking technique. Someone who's reading a recipe that says sweat the onions and you don't know how to do it can do a Google search or hopefully, in a perfect world, follow a link in the recipe to a page that tells them how to do this specific cooking technique that they didn't know how to do. So that's two topics working together, not a linear relationship between them. The relationship between them is that one is about explaining how to do something that the other one assumed you knew how to do. So there's no linear relationship there. You're going to follow that link if you don't know how to sweat vegetables, and you're going to ignore it if you do. The third principle is that the topic must establish its context. Readers can arrive from absolutely anywhere. Search and links may be imprecise. In other words, when you follow a link that somebody provided, they may have a little different idea about things, and you may end up somewhere that's not quite right. And you need to know, well, where am I? Where did I land? And even more so with search. It often Google says, well, this sounds like it's about what you're interested in. But you arrive at that page. If it doesn't help you figure out, is this where I'm supposed to be? Is this the place I'm interested in being? Then people will quickly move on. I remember I was teaching this class in a live classroom setting once, and somebody told the story of watching somebody, I think it was in a lab situation or something, where they had actually found the right page, but they couldn't figure out if it was the right page. And they'd sort of been scanning around, and the mouse had been moving around. And at the point at which they gave up and concluded that this was not the page they needed, their mouse pointer was actually pointing to the piece of information they needed. But their eyes didn't quite get down that far down the page. We don't give information very long anymore. We're in filter mode. We've included it all. We're filtering it afterwards. Stuff gets filtered out fairly quickly. And you can easily get filtered out if you don't establish context, so that people don't know, oh, I'm in the right place now. And because we're often a little bit off, you also want to have this context be really navigable. An example of this, I had a prospective client whose business was online backup software. And they wanted me to do an analysis of their material. And the first thing, of course, that anybody is ever going to look for backup software is how do you do a restore? Because it's the thing that hardly ever happens, and you're in a panic when you need to do it. And so I just went to Google, and I typed in the name of the product, and I typed the word restore. And the very first thing that came up was somebody tearing an absolute strip off this company because they were completely unable to find the restore procedure, and basically it was saying, I wish I'd never bought it, I wish I'd used Norton instead, blah, blah, blah. This was on the company's own forum, and it's the #1 thing that came up on Google, is a user so frustrated because they couldn't find the information and saying, I wish I didn't use their product. This is not good. And the next thing I did, I went into the help system, their own help system, and I typed restore, and I got about a dozen links, the first 10 or so of which were general blah blah material saying, and you can restore. And there was no link on the word restore. So yes, I know I can restore, but how? Turns out I think it was about the 11th hit in their search engine. And nobody who's not sort of being paid to go look is going to go all the way to 11. They're going to go to the forum and complain and say you should have bought something else. So, and not a lot you can do to optimize that search engine. There's probably a bunch of blah blah topics that didn't need to be there, and taking them away would have helped. But if where any of those blah blah topics, if where they had said you can restore, if that had been a link to the topic on how to restore, that user would not have been lost and would not be publicly saying don't use this company, use something else. So a navigable context is really important as well. People need to know where they are, and if they're in the wrong place, they need to be able to get where they need to go. So here is an example of a topic that establishes context. It's from the Wikipedia article on the city of Ottawa, where I used to live. You can see that right away it establishes geographic context by giving its geographic coordinates. It places in its political context. It's the capital of Canada, where it stands in the local geography on the Ottawa River, eastern portion of southern Ontario, what it borders on, when it was founded, so it has this historical context. Over here in this sidebar, there are other context-setting features. Pictures tend to be a context-setting feature. Now I know where I am because I see this, and there's a whole bunch of political information underneath this. So most of the information that this article leads with is context-setting information. You know you're in the right place because of all this. And it has this really cool feature, which I love in Wikipedia, which is, this is an article about the capital city of Canada, about other uses of Ottawa, disambiguation. So it's actually giving you a list of all the things that the word Ottawa refers to, and telling you what each of them mean, so that you can find the one you want. So this is a highly navigable context. Set the context, make it navigable. The next principle is that an every page is page one topic tends to conform to a type. I'm actually beginning to say tends to conform to a pattern, because a topic type is something more, a stricter definition in structured content, where it has to do with XML schemas and things like this. The real point is that there's a pattern to, and this is actually a pattern, but there's a pattern to how you write knitting patterns. And there's a certain vocabulary that they use, a certain number of things that you establish. If we go back, we can see that a recipe conforms to a pattern. Everybody knows what recipes look like. It helps you recognize a recipe. It helps you set the context of a recipe, that you know what the pattern looks like. And it turns out, and you can go through Wikipedia and you will find this over and over and over and over again throughout Wikipedia, that articles of a particular type tend to conform to the same pattern. All articles about actors, same pattern. All articles about cars, same pattern. All articles about cities, same pattern. Articles about chemicals, about programming languages, it doesn't matter what it is. You're going to find the same pattern over and over and over again. And there's a very good reason for this. Every page is page one topic has a specific and limited purpose. And the specific and limited purpose is going to be served by the same pieces of information in more or less the same order, more or less expressed the same way for each instance of it. There's simply going to be a better way to do this. And if not better, at least more familiar, so that when people come to it, it's where they expect it to be. They begin to learn these patterns. And so it becomes really important when you're writing every page is page one content to understand what the pattern of a topic of this type is. And if you can find one out in the wild, then you should use that pattern. And you may want to come up with your own variant your own more specific version of that pattern. Again, if we go back to this recipe, this is from, I think, Canadian Living magazine, and it has a bunch of additional features, features that might occur in other recipes, but not necessarily, but which you're going to find very consistently in Canadian Living's recipes. It has a rating. It has items on portion size, how many servings it makes. It has nutritional information. Some recipes would have wine pairings. If you were running a wine site, for instance, and you wanted to do recipes for wine matching for food, then a wine match is going to be an absolutely essential part of that pattern for your site. So you're going to take the recipe pattern, the general recipe pattern, and you're going to enhance it and make it more specific by adding the stuff that's particular to you. Yes. So yes, other examples of patterns. Sometimes these aren't, sometimes they're really clearly set off by different headings. Sometimes the patterns are less clear. But if you look at virtually any used car review that you will find, you're actually going to find it goes through very much the same pattern. It's going to talk about the recall history. It's going to talk about known problems. It's going to talk about, well, things that other new cars reviews talk about, like mileage, and it's the same stuff people want to know each time. And so if you're going to produce effective content, you're going to need to give them the same class of information, more or less the same way of expressing it, more or less the same organization, for it to be useful to them. And then you can enhance and go further on top of that. But following the patterns that people expect, the patterns that define what's useful to them, is the basis of what you need to do to have a successful every page is page one pattern. And there's a very important concept in information foraging, which is information scent. We will read a piece of information if on the first sniff, the first little read, the first little glance at the page, it clearly has the scent of the information we're looking for. And adhering to a well-known or even just sensible pattern gives a very strong information set. So context setting and a strong information pattern, information type are essential parts of establishing an information set, and that's how you get it to be your page and not somebody else's that gets pulled out of those Google search results, that gets pulled out of your help system search results, that helps the user get to the page they're looking for in the most immediate fashion. It's not where you position it in the table of contents anymore. It's about how the page itself signals to the reader, this is the page you're looking for. Here's another example of of a page with a definite topic pattern to it. It comes from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. It's all about birds, and you can see that it's not all visible on page, but you can see that there's tabs here for identification, life history, sound, video. There's a range map. There's a description of the appearance, conservation status. There is its names in the Linnaean classification system. And these are navigable. You have this context is navigable to similar species. We wanted a booby with different colored feet. Related species. There's a go-to box to go to various related things. And there is, right in the middle, of course, a really good context setting thing, which is a picture of the thing and a basic description of what it is. So you can see here there's a very definite pattern, and it's doing all these things that every page is page one topic needs to do in terms of creating a context, making that context navigable. Any questions at this point before we...
Everybody's quiet.
Oh dear. I hope they're transfixed and not sleeping. Anyway, we will plunge onward. So, This is probably, here I'm going to get into a couple of principles that may seem a little counterintuitive. They're actually really, really important, and you get into terrible trouble if you ignore them. But they're a bit counterintuitive to how we're used to thinking about things. So the first one is an individual topic should stay on one level. Now, when you write a book, it's going to change levels, and in fact, a big part of planning how to write a book is to figure out, do I start with detail, and then do I expand out to draw a general principle from the detail? Or do I start by giving people a general principle and then go down into detail to show examples of the principle like I've just talked about? And, there are different ways of doing this. Different ones suit different learning styles. Different ones perhaps suit different kinds of material. But it's very much part, if you're writing a book, these are the important decisions that authors make when they're doing that. And so we tend to think, well, this is a big part of our responsibility, is to figure out what's the best way to do this. But when readers are navigating from the bottom up, they actually are in charge of making those decisions. They get to decide whether they want just the details right now, and yes, maybe I'll need to understand the principle later, but right now I just need the details. Or somebody else may come along and say, well, I'm a little hesitant here. I'd like to understand what's going on. I need the big picture before I go plunging into anything. It's their decision to make. And so we actually, instead of deciding for them when to change levels, we need to create an information set so that they can choose for themselves when they should change levels. And that means that we need to write each of our individual topics on one level. So here's one possible way of assigning different kinds of levels to topics. Please don't think I'm suggesting this is it, this is how to do it. This is one way it can be done. And it might apply to some subject matter and not to others. It's just an example. So you might have a number of task topics that tell you how to do things. You might have a number of workflow topics that tell you how to get an overall project done. One of the interesting things about workflows, very often they get sort of relegated to the table of contents in a book like content set, and that can actually be really bad because people may not realize that the table of contents is describing a workflow and they may miss it altogether. Workflows are actually tremendously important, and in many cases the person responsible for the workflow is not the same as the person responsible for the tasks. The project manager is often responsible for the workflow and assigns out the work. So in many cases, the workflow topic is actually written for a completely different audience than the task topic is written for. And it operates on a different level because the project manager isn't going to go in and do the nitty-gritty of the task. They're going to understand in what order it needs to be done and assign it out to someone else to do. And so these are different topics for different people on different levels. A Pathfinder topic is the kind of topic where somebody comes and says, I've heard that your tool is good for X, but I don't understand how it helps me. I have this business problem. What do I do with your stuff to solve my business problem? So that's a level up from workflow. It's a more high-level kind of thing. And a Pathfinder topic is kind of going to say, well, here's the way that our tool thinks about the world and the way it's set up, and therefore if you have this kind of business problem, then you might want to establish this kind of workflow, which then would lead you to tasks. And then, the big picture topic is kind of taking that. This is how our tool thinks about the world, how it was designed to work, and sort of giving the overall big picture. One of the things we know is that people very, very seldom want the big picture up front. One of the perils of minimalism, as it's been taught frequently, is that we tend to say, the traditional academic way of organizing a book starts with general principles. And so we've tended to start manuals with general principles. And then there's this exercise when you do a minimalism workshop where you go through the manual and you go to the first point you're actually asked to do something. And then the instruction is get rid of everything before that. And then the big picture is gone. It's eliminated altogether. Now, John Carroll, when he described minimalism, was very clear that people will want the big picture at some point. But in many cases, it's actually being lost or thrown away, which is a terribly bad thing, with consequences that may not be immediately apparent and may be very hard to test for in a usability lab. But the big picture is important. It just isn't the starting point. And we don't know when or why people are going to want it. But they are going to want it at some point. So we have to leave it to them to decide, okay, now I need to go to the big picture. And therefore the big picture needs to be a standalone topic on its own level. Here's the one that really can make you itch, but it's actually really, really important. We've already kind of referred to it a little bit earlier. But an every page is page one topic must assume that the reader is qualified. That seems very counterintuitive, but it's very important. And the reason is, if you think about the specific and limited purpose of, say, a recipe, it is to teach someone who knows how to cook to cook one particular dish. Recipes don't set out to teach you how to cook, as I said earlier. If every single technique and step in a recipe had to be explained to someone who'd never done it before, the recipe would get to be very big, very long. So each individual topic assumes that the reader is qualified. And for readers who are not qualified for this topic, we can then write other topics. So we write a bunch of recipe topics, and we discover some people don't know how to sweat vegetables, so we write some reluctant gourmet topics about how to do basic cooking techniques. We don't add that information into every recipe topic, because those would make them less useful for their target audience. We create another set of topics, and we create links between them, so that people who don't know how to sweat vegetables will have a link, and you click and it says sweat vegetables, and it takes you to the topic on how to sweat vegetables. So assuming the reader is qualified is something that applies to each topic and each topic type, really, because the topic type defines what a qualified reader needs to know. But it doesn't apply as a universal, there's no one universal qualification for the information set as a whole. The information set as a whole is serving readers with a range of different qualifications, from highly qualified to very unqualified, potentially. And it is giving topics at each level of qualification with a linking scheme between them, so that readers who start in trying to do the thing they want to do, because very few people are going to come and say, I need to start off with the most elementary material and learn it all before I get to what I want to do. It's not what happens. I want to cook this, so I'm going to go straight to that. And that's where they're going to start. Every page is page one. And from there, they're going to discover that they need to use other pieces of information. And it should be available to them when they make that discovery, because they're working from the bottom up. They're working from the thing I want to do, the place that I entered, almost certainly in some way unqualified to do the thing that they're trying to do. And so we need to provide them with the material that helps them get qualified, but not by putting it into the topic. We do it by providing other topics written for people who need to get qualified on that subject and providing the linking that gets them there. And that gets us to the final principle, which is that every page is page one topics must link richly. We're back again to the Manakawagan crater example that we've looked at before and looked at in the last session. And we can see that it is full of links, as is almost every Wikipedia article. And as we saw, these links are based on subject affinities. This is linking to other stuff that you might not know about. So the Manakawagan crater is one of the oldest known impact craters. What's an impact crater? If I know that, I just keep reading. If I don't know, I can click and I can go and find out what an impact crater is. It's the largest visible impact crater on Earth. If I don't know where Earth is, well, there's the information. It's located primarily in the Manawatu Regional Municipality. If I don't know where that is, I can go find out. So every time there's a place where I may not know what you're talking about, there's a link, at least to all the significant subjects, because clearly we're not linking on things like 5 kilometers, what's a kilometer, right? It would be ridiculous. You would at that point have everything be a link, and that would be too much. So you do need to figure out, what are the significant things here? What's the significant context that I need to establish, as opposed to simply knowing that people speak English and know what years are. The example near the bottom, about 215.5 million years ago, Triassic period. We don't have a link on million. We don't say, oh, somebody might not know what million means, because that's sort of broad general knowledge. But we do have one on Triassic period, because that's more specific. It's more specific to the history of the Manawatu crater and its significance in the history of the Earth. And it might have been the cause of the Carnian extinction event, so that again is a link. That's a significant subject affinity for this article. And that's how linking works in a bottom-up information architecture. We figure out what are the significant subjects that this talks about, the subjects that people might need to learn about to understand what this topic is about. And we link based on those. Here's Gerry McGovern again. We don't work on the home page. We work on the network. This is fundamentally, what the difference between a top-down information architecture and a bottom-up information architecture is. Top-down information architecture is built around the home page. We don't work on the home page anymore. We work on the network, and the network is bottom-up. The web is a network, and those who work on the web are networkers. The link is the essence of the web. That, after all, what is it? The web is made of connections. So the links are what make the web a web. Web writing is therefore link writing. It's an incredibly important concept. We have tended to have this notion, there's even a hostility to links in some cases, that links might distract somebody from reading all the way through. That's just the wrong way to think about writing for the web and writing for any hypertext system, which is writing for a help system, whatever it is. Web writing is link writing. The connections, the organization of information in a web, in a bottom-up information architecture, is expressed through links. So McGovern says, don't think homepage. There's no direction home on the web, because home changes based on the context of what people want to do, which is another way of saying every page is page one. Depending on what you want to do, the page that is about doing that, that's your page one. So we don't get to say this is home and this is everything else. This is home and this is the stuff that you get to from home. Everything is home. Nothing is home. Every page is page one. Questions there. Those are the 7 principles. I've got a little bit more to say on how assembling topic sets, because it's usually a big question that comes up. But any questions?
We have several things now.
Good.
When you were asking whether we transfixed or not, the comment was transfixed, that you're validating what we keep trying to tell people. Me too.
Good.
Question was, writing properly structured topics is obviously important, but it sounds like the real work is in the search and content management infrastructure rather than authoring. I was thinking just the opposite, but...
Yeah, I would say just the opposite. This actually, content management is a top-down tool. It's designed to make top-down organization work, where you can no longer keep a table of contents in your head. That's not to say you wouldn't use a content management system to do a bottom-up information architecture. But, though, as we'll see in the next session, with the right approach, You can often get away with something simpler like a version control system, the same kind of thing that software uses. But it is actually within the topics themselves. Those subject affinities exist within the topic. And there are techniques, and I will describe a technique in the next session, where simply by the metadata that you capture with an individual topic, you can have topics self-organize because they recognize each other's metadata and form these relationships based on saying, you're about, I talk about this, you are about this, I will link to you. And so, in fact, there are things in terms of that richness of linking and that complexity of relationships is actually really hard to manage by hand from the top down. The Wikipedia does it by having an absolute army of people who go around creating these links for them. We can't afford to do that, so we need more automated methods, which is what I'm going to talk about next time. Now, if you're using a tool set that's otherwise strongly top-down and you're trying to do bottom-up in that context, then your CMS may be very helpful to you. But the real focus in bottom-up is the topic itself.
All right. Well, we've got 8 minutes left and a hard stop at 10 o'clock. Let me get you a couple of more questions. And I'll send all the questions to Mark, too. He wrote a nice blog post based on the questions last time. And I'll put that in on the YouTube channel when we post the video also. So, folks, don't worry, you'll get your questions answered. Here's another one. I pretty much agree with everything Mark says, but it's such a change to how we've written for so long. Do you have any advice for how to get out of the old paradigm and how to tell if they get it right topic by topic?
Well, I mean, part of the advice is follow the 7 principles of every page is page 1, and that's the reason for writing the principles. You kind of need to have a check on yourself. So you kind of have to write something and say, okay, am I establishing context? Do I have a clearly well-defined purpose? Can I see a pattern here? Am I staying on one level? Am I assuming my reader is qualified for this particular task? Am I deferring to other topics, things where they might not be qualified, might need this additional information? So the principles are very much designed to be that kind of checklist of am I doing this right? The other piece of advice I would give is think of it like writing an article. Forget the rest of the information set for the period you're writing. Don't think this is one topic of this very large manual. Think about it as I need to write an article on this. Maybe it's a knowledge-based article. One of the consequences here is the distinction between manual and knowledge-based. In the past has been manual was written top-down before it was released. The knowledge base was written bottom-up after the product was released. Well, before and after really don't matter when you're not putting paper in a box, and when the product is being updated every 6 weeks, whatever it is. But almost everybody's update schedule is a lot sooner than it used to be. So that distinction between knowledge base and manual, I think, is going to be gone in 10 years. So think about it as I'm writing a knowledge base article on this particular thing. Don't worry too much about the broader context, because if you do all the other stuff, if you follow all the other principles, it will fit into that broader context. But it very much is, it's a topic-first way of thinking about things. And very often when you're adapting to something new, it's not adding the new that's hard, it's subtracting the old. It's the things you have to stop doing. The things you have to unlearn are the hardest. So I think you want to try and put yourself in a circumstance where you are forced to unlearn all the top-down habits and separate yourself from them.
All right, 5 minutes left. Here's a nice compliment. I'm loving that I'm being given the words for principles that are intuitive to communicators but unknown to subject matter experts. Me too. Vocabulary is a key.
Yes, indeed. We need a way to think in this space, and that's important.
Totally is. Here we go. On Wikipedia, if I search for Agile software development, I get a mini talk on the left pane and a process summary in the right pane.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Interesting. All right.
Yeah, well, most Wikipedia articles do have mini TOCs and mini TOC of the article, and some of them are quite long. We shouldn't get the idea that in every page is necessarily, 300 words. Sometimes it's 300 words. Sometimes it's 3,000. And if it obeys the principles, it should be fine. Some things need to be that long.
Right. No, that's actually, that was resonating with me the whole time. Okay, here's one. This is opposite of some of our previous discussions that show links can slow or bog down the reader. I think that's true for excessive links. I can see where if you're writing for the web, where they're important. This user is not there yet, but she understands the concept of every page is page one, and that's cool.
Yeah, it's certainly true that if you just do a raw measure of reading speed with links and without links, you see a very slight increase in reading speed without links, which isn't surprising. You have to process the fact that the link is there. The problem is, what is my metric? If the metric is, I want to make sure that the reader reads my topic to the end and understands it and can answer questions about it, which is how we used to be educated, right? We were educated to understand texts and to be able to answer questions on texts. This is why so many people graduate from university with high degrees and can't actually do anything useful in the real world and have to go into an apprenticeship then to actually do stuff, because they weren't taught to do stuff. They were taught to understand texts and answer questions about them. And a lot of our usability testing is still done that way. But it's not the point. The point is, can the user navigate to the information they need and act correctly? And taken by and large, if you look at the course somebody has to go through, the kind of wayfinding they had to go to get to a full understanding of what they're even asking and a correct answer to it, it simply doesn't, the idea that they'll go straight to the correct topic and read it straight to the end and be ready to act just doesn't hold up. And John Carroll showed that it didn't hold up back in the 80s. All the studies around minimalism were basically saying that doesn't work. That model does not work. We don't get to correct action on that model. So yes, it's technically true. If you take out all the links, people will get to the end quicker if they stay as far as the end. But if you take out all the links, their path to a correct solution to their problem will be longer in most cases.
All right. Well, we are really out of time. There's some really good questions. There's 3 really good questions left. But we need to, you got any slides left, Mark?
I was basically going to talk about covering the big picture, which is often a question that comes up. And essentially, how do you cover a big picture with every page is page one topics? And the answer is kind of like this. You create a set of topics that work together in the way we described earlier.
Okay. So I think we'll pick up. We've got one more session, folks. It's next month. So I think mark your slide. We're on number 34. So anything that we didn't cover, we can make sure. Oh, look, here we go. That's the one we want to see. There we go. That's what we want to see. Let me switch back over real quick so you guys can see where to sign up for the next Mark session if you haven't already done so. And then we unfortunately have to go. So we'll make sure that Mark answers the rest of your questions, folks, on the web. All right, so we already had the question. So don't forget, there's the link there at the bottom. If you haven't already signed up for Mark's next session, he's going to talk tools and finish up things from today. All right, awesome. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much.
And we'll see everybody next month.
Hey.
Bye.
Bye-bye.